Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show, we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Hawkeye. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we get our full-blown introduction to Maya, aka Echo. Kind of seeing her story from the beginning, her being, her hearing, because we don't know whether it's just a situation if she was just born deaf or was it something. I feel like if it was circumstances like Matt becoming blind, I feel like they probably would have focused on it. So I think it's probably she was just maybe potentially born that way, and so I think it's probably a part of her story. It's just like she adapts, because her father, who's played by the actor, I want to say his character's name Matthias in Longmire. It's been a couple years, so I'm blanking on it. I recently saw him a preview for something where it seems like he might be the lead in something, but I've seen that actor pop up and stuff. He's really good. But I was like, I had no idea he was playing her dad in this. And I was like, oh, that's cool. But essentially, she does. He tells her about, and I thought it was interesting. She's like, "Oh, do dragons exist?" He's like, "Maybe they do, but in a different world." I'm like, "Hey," which is interesting because. Well, in many different facets, because, we know they exist because of Shang-Chi, and, the fact is that they do live in another world, but there's also, once again, say whatever you want to about it, there is the Iron Fist thing, which does have a connection to the Hand, which I don't know if she directly has any connection to the Hand. I know she's connected to Daredevil, who is connected to the Hand, so, there's a lot of, it's more so probably about the Shang-Chi related stuff, rather than anything related to dragons and other facets. I mean, because I know, Iron Fist literally comes from the heart of a dragon, so, so that's just where my brain went with that, connecting all those dots. But he basically told her about basically living in two worlds. It's right, because you are one of a kind, but you have to find a way to kind of live between both worlds. Because she was like, if I go to a school where not everyone is deaf, do I have to stop signing? And he was like, no. You just got to find that balance of just being, and she shows that she quickly adapts to things, and he tells her to kind of focus on it. It's when she's doing, martial arts, it's right, speed matters more than size, and we see that she's very perceptive of stuff. Even without her hearing, she recognizes the motions of people's bodies. All right, this is what you do when you're doing this. So she was easily able to take the kid down. There was even a point where it's her dad was like, okay, your uncle's gonna pick you up, and we see the hand and everything. I'm like, oh, I was like, is that all we're gonna get? So we might be entering spoiler territory, because I'm curious to see if they actually full-blown go through it for it or not, or is that all we're gonna get, a la Superman cameo in Shazam. I wonder, is it going to just be that? So, it's spoilers. God, I might try to. I'll go ahead and talk around. If you're curious, I'm going to go spoilers with who that person is, in case you didn't know. It's Fisk. And I didn't know this. I only know this because I've heard other people bring it up. But in the comics, Echo's adopted father is Wilson Fisk. So, but in this role, it seems like he just plays 100%, stays her uncle. He's been in her life for a long time. But, even older. Also, I wonder, is that true to the character, or is that specifically related to the actress? The leg situation. I wonder, is that, the actress herself, or is that just, part of the character? I thought that was it. Because I knew about her being deaf, I didn't know about her leg either. So I'm wondering, is that just, the actress herself has, that situation with her leg, or is that just something for the character? Whatever the case may be, because it reminds me of the actress who plays Barbara in Titans. That's her real life circumstance of with her leg, so that's why I didn't know if it's kind of something similar in that regard. So I'll have to look into it later. But aside from that, once again, just showcasing how good she is, and how very good she is in a fight, but also, it seems like this world, it's in particular, the tracksuit mafia is kind of, I don't know if it's 100% her legacy. At the very least, her dad was a part of it. Not necessarily he was the head honcho, I think. It was kind of considering he was a head honcho. Maybe it was a collaborative effort between Wilson Fisk and him. But now it's Ronan showed up and killed him, and I'm like, wow. So that's at least two people that are going to be gunning for Clint for different reasons, yet similar reasons, because Yelena blames him for Natasha's death, and obviously she blames Maya blames Ronan for her father's death. It is the thing of the past is coming back to haunt you in many different regards. Now, the Natasha thing, it's not on him, but he feels the responsibility of, I should have been the one to die. And I thought it was so interesting because a lot of people were always saying like they felt like Hawkeye should have been the one that died during Endgame and not Natasha. But people have pointed out it's actually kind of interesting because they kind of leaned into that because he does feel his guilt over, I should have been the one to die. So it's almost like adhering to what the fans have said, but it's also just being like, we're going with the narrative we want, but this also kind of fits with what you wanted anyway. Not this, you get what I'm saying? It's just interesting. I've heard people put that perspective out there, and I think it's fascinating. I was fine for either way. I'm like, obviously it's like a heart-wrenching thing. Regardless, I felt it when it was Natasha. I felt it when it was Clint in What If. So you kind of get your cake and eat it too. Second time I've used that analogy today. That yes, it's not the perfectly fit analogy you would think it is, but regardless, I'm using it in the context of what you typically would use it under. But it's like, yeah, like you still kind of got it in the MCU both ways. You got it mainline continuity, it's Natasha, but because of the Ultron thing and What If, Clint was the one that made the ultimate sacrifice. But now we kind of understand like why she's hunting Ronan, but she doesn't know that Clint's Ronan. Now, I thought the moment she saw Clint and saw him moving and stuff like that, she pieced it together. But of course she wouldn't because he's not using the same fighting style. Like, he has elements of his fighting style with, between like his fighting style is Hawkeye and Ronan, but the thing is he's using a sword, so that changes his fighting style probably enough that Maya wouldn't immediately. I mean, to be fair, she saw him, but she'd probably have to see his movements from a certain angle to recognize it because she only saw him for bits and pieces. It's not like she studied his movements. Maybe she has, and we don't know. But I almost thought she'd immediately recognize that he was Ronan, because I thought it was interesting. Like, well, before Maya showed up, there were so many conversations. Like, one of the guys, basically, he got like, well, Kate's like, oh, you're mad at me? She's like, I don't know why you're mad at me, though. Like, I came to rescue. He's like, yeah, and I was in the process of clearing your name from the suit. And she's like, oh. He's like, yeah. So you kind of done enough already. And so the guy's over there talking to Kate about the fact is that he bought Imagine Dragon tickets for his girlfriend, but they got into a fight, and he says like, oh, she looks at them as like a gift, so she wants to take her sister. And Kate's like, well, I mean, the good thing is now you don't have to go see Imagine Dragons. He was like, but I love Imagine Dragons. So she's like, oh, I was like, oh, that's kind of a, oh, don't attack it. I've only heard like bits and pieces of Imagine Dragons. I've never listened to a lot of their music. Nothing against them, it just never circled around me except for like commercials and stuff like that. Tangent aside, it's like, oh, but she's only doing this to hurt me because she doesn't even like them. And it's like, well, both of you need to apologize, and and it's just like, tell her how it makes you feel and stuff like that. He's like, okay, let me get a pen and like write it down. And she's like, okay, because she was basically using this as an analogy for her and Clint. Like, it's about communication, and there hasn't been enough. But then like Home Dude's like, you're talking too much, and then Echo comes through. And she notices Clint's hearing aid, and she's like, oh, like, and he's like, oh, I'm not deaf, hard of hearing, just not deaf. And she's saying, like, Kazi, I think, is the guy that acts as a translator, says, like, hey, she says that you rely on technology a little too much, which he was like, I use, like, a bow and string, like, what are you talking about? Oh, right, the hearing aid. It's like, you'd probably be better off with that. Because for her, she doesn't need to hear. Like, for her, it's probably like that reliance on technology. Without relying on technology, she sharpened her skills to be the skilled fighter there. She's able to make up without needing something else. Like, she just, it's the badass that she is. And so she's asking him about, like, it's like, right, she's not Ronan, she just put the suit on. And then he goes to explain, like, right, Ronan's dead. And it's like, really? If Ronan's dead, then who came? Because she was like, oh, because she's wondering whether or not Ronan's back in activity. Because what jump-started all of this is because the news report saying Ronan's back. And she was like, oh, this is an opportunity to get my revenge. Is what that ultimately was. Plus, the criminal underworld stirring up is like, whoa, is Ronan back? Like, should we be kind of freaked out? Should we be worried? Because he's been going for a couple years now. But he says, like, oh no, like, he's dead. And it's like, well, who killed him? And he's like, Black Widow. And it's like, how do you know? Because I was there. She's like, you're lying. Technically he is, technically isn't. Because Ronan died, like, he was Ronan at that time, but Natasha's sacrifice made him realize, like, no, like, she pulled him out from being Ronan anyway for this mission in Endgame. And then ultimately for her to die like that, it just, and sacrifice herself like that, made him go, like, no, I'm not going to be about that anymore. So Ronan did technically die that day because of Black Widow's death. She did technically kill Ronan, so he wasn't lying, but he kind of was. So, you know, it was that half-hearted truth. He kind of made the truth what he needed it to be in this situation. And she starts strangling Kate, because I guess, like, maybe in her time, like, Kate was, like joking about the situation or something, because we didn't hear what Kate was saying, but whatever it was, it pissed Maya off, because I guess Maya was like, oh, you're glorifying the suit, and she's like, I promise you, I just picked up the suit because I didn't want anyone to know that I was there. I was just hiding my identity. I had no idea what the suit was at the time, so. But, luckily, Clint ended up breaking free, and it turns into, like, a free-for-all. Like, Maya goes up against him, like, handling business, and knocks away and destroys his hearing aid. So I didn't realize his hearing was that bad. Like, it seems like he says, like, I guess it's like he's not, like, I guess clinically they probably wouldn't describe him as deaf. It's just his hearing is super bad off, but it seems like it'd be the equivalency of him being deaf, but I guess it's like not enough, like, in that lane. I don't know. I thought that was interesting. So it's like, yeah, because without it he really can't hear anything. And so he managed to get his bow and arrows, and, like, honestly, it's like, because I haven't seen, like, the last time we've seen some badass, like, arrow stuff for me has been Arrow. Like, you know, we've been without a Green Arrow, like, and actively seeing a Green Arrow in action for a while, and it's been a while since we've seen Hawkeye in action, but it's like, you still gotta appreciate them archer skills, just like, dude, especially the one from behind when he's got the arrow pointed behind, and he shoots the guy, like, in the arm, I'm like, in the hand, I'm like, dude, that is sick. Just like, flip. I'm like, dude, that's so cool. And then, like, Kazi versus Kate, and she's like, no, I had that when, like, Clint shows up to bail her out. So it's like, right, we got to get out of here. And so they run to the car, and she's like, oh, let's get in this car. Which he's like, I'm not going to break into a 72 Challenger. And they get into a beat-up car. She's like, no, I'll drive. But he can't hear her, so he's telling her, no, he wants her to drive, and so he'll do the shooting, but it's like, well, don't have much choice. Which I love how they did that. I don't know if it was one true, like, continuous shot, but the rotating of the camera in the car sequence, I'm like, that's actually pretty dope. Once again, I'm not a cinematography nut, but this is one of those instances where I'm like, oh, dude, that's actually pretty cool. Like, because, once again, I understand, like, the behind the scenes of that. Like, if it wasn't, it probably was, like, you can probably see where it's edited. I don't know, but if it's a disguised continuous shot, that spin, that 360, like multiple 360s, because I'm saying it does like maybe like a 1080, like, because it spins like, yeah, it is 1080. Yeah, it does like a 1080 spin because it turns like 360 like 3 times. But whatever the case may be, I thought that was pretty dope. And obviously going through all the arrows is like, right, no, he's like, no, don't use this arrow. No, don't use that one. This one's too dangerous. She's like, all right. And she fires the different arrows. I'm like, I'm trying to remember, like, I don't think we've seen too many of his trick arrows in the movies at all. Because every arrow he's ever used has been a normal arrow. Like, what if kind of, like, tackled some of, like, the more trick arrows? I mean, because even, like, Arrow, the show didn't touch on, like, because Green Arrow's the same way, has a whole bunch of trick arrows. Like, they never really leaned into that too much. There's some, but it's like most of his arrows were normal arrows with the exception of a few. It seems like they've always leaned into Hawkeye's more traditional regular arrows, but there was the one that was like Play-Doh. There was the one that was pretty much like acid. There was the explosive one. And I even love that she's like, wait, there were like 4 more arrows more dangerous than that one? But like I said, I just love that entire sequence. And she's just like, maybe this would be, and he's like, oh, maybe, like, she says the line of basically, like, it'll be easier if I'm facing a different direction. He's like, hey, maybe it'll be easier if you're facing a different direction. It's like, I love that bit. But he, like, turns the car, like, and kind of goes reverse, and she's doing her thing. I like when they ultimately get to the bridge, and she's like, aim up. And, like, he's telling her to aim up. And, because she was able to get her bow back. I'm like, why is it so important to get your bow back? It's like, well, to be fair, it's your ammunition. It's like, you need your bow back to actually be able to do some archery yourself. But at first he's telling her to aim up. I'm like, what's he going to do? And because he snuck and got the arrow. And I love it's like, oh, we got the flash drive arrow back. It's like, has that come up before the What If episode? Because I feel like, I mean, to be fair, I don't remember if that ever came up in the Avenger movies. That flash drive arrow. And I love that she's like, back up, you don't even want to see what this arrow does. And I'm like, well, it helped bring down Ultron, so, all-powerful old version of Ultron, so I was like, yeah, it comes in pretty handy. Granted, once again, there was the whole, like, Toby Jones's character being, like, on the fly. You know, there were other contributing factors to it, but still. And the moment he's having her aim up, I'm like, what's that going to do? Like, what are you going to... And then it took me forever to notice. I was like, the moment he fired the arrow, I was like, there's Pym right... No. I was like, yo, are we... I'm like, yo, that's dope! Huge arrow. I love it. I was like, yeah. I'm like, when did you pick that up? You must have been... I wonder who hooked you up with that. It had to be Scott. Or did Hope or Hank like set you up? Like, I'm curious. I'm sure you probably got it from Scott being like, "Oh, Hawkeye, sure, you need this, no problem." So they made sure to jump off the bridge, and luckily the plunger, and now Kate's like, oh, that's what the plunger arrow's for. So they get on the train and everything, and I love that she's like, oh, we gotta walk the dog, like he's been cooped up all day. And then Clint's like, yeah, I agree, you're right to call yourself the greatest archer. And she's like, wait, did you really mean that? He's like, yeah, we probably should go walk the dog when we get back. He's been cooped up all day. And she's just kind of smiling at it. But luckily, they went to someone to get his hearing aid fixed, and I love that she was like, "Oh, they're calling you Hawkeye. They should call you Hawkeye." He's like, "Ha ha ha! Block, delete it." But got the hearing aid fixed, and I love that. Like, she's like saying all this stuff, and he's just kind of distracted, and he finally puts it back in. And she's like, "Wait, was that out the whole time?" Oh, because I'd actually skipped over what was a very, like, heartfelt and important moment, too. Was, like, Clint was, like, answering his phone because he thought it was his wife, but it was actually his youngest calling him. And, like, she shows up and she's like, Kate, like, writes out what his son is saying. And that's got to be the most heart-wrenching thing of, like, your son's talking to you, and he's like, oh, like, because he was saying, like, oh, honey, can you text me? But it's like, oh, no, it's your son. And it's, like, the most heart-wrenching thing of, like, especially, like, you can't even hear his voice because he's like, oh, I love hearing your voice and everything. It's like, that's got to be heart-wrenching, Especially when you're in a circumstance where it's like your past is coming back to haunt you, plus, like, you could potentially end up dead, and it's like you're trying to get home to your kid, And it's especially because his son was like, hey, it's okay, like, if you don't make it home for Christmas, I understand. Because he's like, oh, will you be home? Because, his movie marathon and everything. And he's like, no, I will, buddy. Trust me, I promise I'll get there in time. And it's like, even his son's like, because it's happened probably too many times of like, oh, dad's away from work. But it's like, no, like, it's the complicated thing of like the family, like, no, we understand you're a hero. Like, or obviously, it's that, it's kind of like wrong. It's selfish of us to try and occupy, like, you're a hero if you're doing anything. It's so super important, But that's a heart-wrenching thing of like, he can't even hear his son's voice, So, he has to have someone translate for him. It's got to be that's the, but he thanks Kate in the end for doing what she did. But they did sit down and talk. And I love that she's like, oh, like, what you need is, a costume. Like, I can help you with your branding issue. He's like, like, what I do, like, it's meant so I don't get noticed. I was a spy. That's the whole point of not getting noticed. I'm not meant to be in a flashy suit. And she basically gives him, like, she draws him, like, a somewhat, like, comic-accurate version of his costume. And it's like, oh, no, these are supposed to be wings, and there's the H for Hawkeye and everything. And it's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, no. She's like, yeah, it's going to be in purple. And I'm like, I love that. I love that they pay homage to some of the costumes that they don't use. Because there's a lot of characters whose suits are... their suits are comic accurate. Obviously, they made an homage to it as a Halloween costume for Wanda in WandaVision, like her comic book version of it. But the final, like, Scarlet Witch suit is kind of like something they made specifically for the show. It probably is kind of like a little bit of, it's an homage to the OG costume from the comic while putting their own spin to it. While kind of keeping the design they have typically of her from the movies with a little bit of the comic book mixed in. And you even have Sam's Captain America suit being very comic book accurate, straight from the comics. So it's interesting playing into that. But he's like, no, it's not practical for me being a spy for that to work. And she's like, well, we can make it all black and stuff like that. Which part of me was like, is there a version of his suit that is just all black or something like that? Or is that... Because there's also, like, part of me that's thinking of... What was it? What was his name? Was it Spider Monkey? I don't remember. Peter's suit from Far From Home, where he's just like, in the whole black suit because he's trying to be like, no, I'm not Spider-Man. That whole thing. So I'm curious if there's an angle of that, what they were referencing. But obviously, it's like for her, it's like being a hero. This has been the coolest thing ever because it's kind of like put her in the direction of like, yeah, I want to be a hero. But Clint's like living this life comes with sacrifices. Like there's a lot you have to give up. And he's like, and some of that stuff is going forever. She's like, I know, but there's a lot that you gain from it as well, you know? And, you know, because there is give and take for the superhero thing. Because also, like, being a hero, like, this whole life, you know, he lost his best friend because of it. He's lost a lot of time with his family because of being all of this, you know? So, I think it's fascinating. And he brings up the point of, like, the thing is, I'm not worried about it because I'm not someone that should be admired. I'm not a role model, Kate. I appreciate, like, how invested you are. But she's like, no, you are a role model. Like, you know, once again, it's like she brought it up last episode, like him being like an inspiration, especially to her. But the thing is, because Kate's like, you know who Ronan is, but you can't let their identity out because she hasn't pieced it together. I was wondering if she was figuring it out, but she's under the impression he knows who Ronan is and he's just protecting their identity. But it's like, yeah, you know, because he doesn't want to admit, like, doesn't want to bring, that's why he also doesn't want her to admire. It's like, if you find out who I am, that I'm Ronan, like, I'm going to break your heart. Like, I am this killer and everything, especially when she's bringing up the whole Jack thing of him being a murderer. It's like, well, what about me? Like, it doesn't matter if it was bad guys for 5 years, for maybe not the full 5 years, but a good chunk of that time, I was killing bad guys with no regard just because, you know, I was trying to clean up the world and do something with myself. I was angry and I needed an outlet for that anger, you know? I mean, whether that's all there is to it, maybe we'll get some more insight to why he did all the, you know, Ronin stuff that he did. But when it's all said and done, as they're walking, like, we do find out about the Tracksuit Mafia a little bit. Yeah, they started off small, but they did eventually grow. Because we do have Kazi talking to Maya at one point in time. It's like, right, like, your uncle won't be too happy about you doing things. Like, the whole point wasn't like, because she basically expedited everything, kind of blowing up at Kate the way she did, and just like, this whole situation didn't have to be the whole point. Like, if Ronan is still out there, we're supposed to be keeping a low profile, but you kind of we had a whole big spectacle on the bridge and everything, like, in the city, like, we had a whole big spectacle, so that's not good. You know, your uncle wouldn't be too happy about it. She's like, if it was your father, if it was my father, would you be objecting? And it's like, but your father always put the crew first. And she's like, but who's in charge here? And he's like, you are. And she's like, good. You know, so, but it's that thing of like, she's so dedicated to getting revenge. She's not, you know, following her father's footsteps directly when it comes to this organization. But once again, you had, so it sounds like Hawkeye and Fisk have crossed paths at some point in time in this continuity, maybe in that 5-year period. So maybe that might be, I would assume that's implying that Fisk didn't get snapped, if that's the case. But he's like, it sounds like he's tussled with not just the Tracksuit Mafia, but also Fisk. So that's kind of interesting to know. But it's like, yeah, that's a guy you don't want to mess with, the guy at the top, because it's like, Maya is there with the, but she's not the boss. Obviously, Fisk is. Once again, they're not even dropping the name. But that's why I'm curious, like, you know, because people are wondering, like, are we going to get your boy Vincent D'Onofrio back in the, you know, proper in the MCU? Because it's still up in the air. Like, well, we know that they're doing, and Echo is getting her own spinoff. We know that, but also potentially what their plans they have for like Daredevil, and like people. That's one of the things people love the most about Daredevil and just that continuity in general was Vincent D'Onofrio's Fisk. But the thing is always like, right, he won't be as unhinged to the point that he's bashing and decapitating someone with a car door. It's like, no. If it's anything, it's going to be like, yeah, that's a variant of Wilson Fisk. Like, this variant of Wilson Fisk is different. You know, we'll find out. But I'm curious, like, is he going to have like even just the smallest appearance of just like they hinting to Kingpin, but will he full blown actually appear on screen Vincent D'Onofrio style, or like I said, or is it just going to stay like a Superman Shazam type of cameo appearance? We'll have to see. If you're unaware of the reference I'm making, Shazam's post-credit scene, Superman shows up, but it's from the neck down, because it was still up in the air whether or not Henry Cavill was still Superman at the time. I forgot, like, was that all there was to it at that time? Because they hadn't decided whether they were going forward with, like, the Snyderverse continuity and stuff like that. I think that's what it was. Or maybe it was so last minute they couldn't do it. They didn't have enough time to get Henry Cavill, or maybe it would have been too expensive just for the few seconds. I forgot the exact reason. It might have been a combination of everything, whatever the case may be. That's what I'm referencing when I talk about the Shazam thing. But they do roll up at Kate's place because it's like, right, we got to find out more about Jack because, well, Hawkeye admits, Clint's like, well, there's no guarantee that there's a, because, yeah, he might have been at the auction and stuff like that, but that doesn't necessarily mean, because, like, she's like, oh, like, he tried to offer me a butterscotch, and it's like, well, that's not a crime, because she didn't fill in the part of, like, well, it's monogrammed stuff, but it's also, like, even if it is, that was his uncle, so he could have gotten it at any point in time, he could have had it forever, and maybe he has some stash at his own place, that being his uncle and everything, like, maybe he has some, there's a justification for it, so... But Kate wants to dive deeper into it, and it's like, cool, we can sneak into my house. And he's like, whoa, wait. She's like, no, don't worry about it. We'll use Bishop security and find out more we can. So they end up finding out about Kazi working for something known as Sloan. And he's like, what's that business about? And then all of a sudden, also, like, you have Clint, like, lament. Well, he's like, obviously I'm in the wrong business if, like, this is what... because Kate also went into it like her great-great-great-great-grandfather or something built the house that they're living in. She's like, yeah, that chandelier right there, I swung around on it and fell and broke my arm at one point in time. But also Clint's just like, man, like, once again, we know that superheroing doesn't pay. I mean, obviously, I'm assuming S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't pay much either. But yeah, it's like, we know we know Tony didn't hand over any of that cash because of what Sam said. It's like, once again, we got to keep that in mind going forward with every superhero thing of like, yeah, how much are you getting paid for this? You're not getting paid at all. Probably even less so now that Tony's gone. And you didn't get paid from Tony, you're definitely not getting paid now that he's gone. But regardless of all of that, we do have Jack, ironically enough, using Ronan's sword to, because he thinks, like, Clint's like, oh, you're breaking in, but it's like, so that's where we end the episode at. But I'm like, I was like, what? No, it can't already be over. I'm like, I feel that from time to time, because last time I looked at it, I was like, the episode was at like 29 minutes. I'm like, okay, we got a good chunk of time left. And then the moment I looked, I was like, wait, the episode's over? I was like, no, it can't be. So we'll have to wait and see where things end up taking us, but things are definitely heating up. It's definitely going to be interesting to see where the next 3 episodes take us going forward into all of this. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.